Oliver Grant's penthouse overlooked the city like a glass fortress. But tonight, its glittering view gave him no comfort. He sat slouched in a leather armchair blazer, tossed carelessly across the couch, his jaw tight with frustration. "James," he muttered, running a hand through his graying hair, "I can't take another evening of fake smiles and calculated compliments." James, his personal assistant for nearly a decade, leaned against the kitchen counter. He had learned that when Oliver spoke in this tone, trouble usually followed. "Sir, it was just dinner," James replied calmly. "Dinner?" Oliver snapped. "She toasted me with sparkling wine and called me her favorite investment. Am I a man or a bank account on legs?" The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. James considered his words carefully. "Maybe it's time you take a break. Fresh air a trip." "No," Oliver interrupted sharply. Then his eyes brightened with a reckless spark. "No, I know exactly what I'll do. A test? A social experiment?" James sighed. "Whenever you say those words, someone ends up crying or it makes the front page." "This time it'll be different," Oliver insisted. "I'll give an unlimited black credit card to 4 women in my life. No instructions, no rules, just freedom. And I'll watch what they do." James frowned. "That's not an experiment, sir. That's manipulation." "Observation," Oliver corrected. "They'll reveal themselves. Who exactly are you planning to observe?" Oliver counted them on his fingers. "Daisy, of course she'll think it's romantic. Susanna, my assistant, always talking about strategic decisions. Valeria, elegant but forever calculating. And," he paused, "Grace." James blinked. "Grace, the housekeeper." "Yes, the one who once threatened me with a wooden spoon for stirring her risotto." Oliver's lips curved into the faintest smile. "She's the only one who's never asked me for anything. Never treated me like a trophy. She hums while vacuuming and calls me Mr. Grant like she's bored. I want to see what she'll do with power in her hands." James's voice dropped wary. "Sir, Grace isn't like the others. She's different. And you know society doesn't give women like her, black women from working-class neighborhoods, the same room to stumble. What if this test backfires?" Oliver turned away, gazing at the skyline. "Then I'll finally know who's real and who's not." The next morning, 4 sleek black envelopes lay on his desk, each name written in silver ink. Like a chess master arranging pieces, Oliver placed them one by one. Daisy arrived first, heels clicking like applause on the marble floor. Her eyes widened when she saw the envelope. "Oh, Ollie, you shouldn't have," she said, clutching it like a trophy. Susanna came next, all sharp lines and tailored precision. She arched a brow. "A gift. From you." "You're not dying, are you?" Valeria swept in last, draped in couture, as though the elevator doors had opened onto a runway. She eyed the envelope suspiciously. "What trick is this?" And then Grace. She entered through the side door, hair tied in a messy bun apron dusted with flour. "Mr. Grant, that oven's coughing again. Might explode one of these days." Oliver handed her the envelope with an unusual softness in his voice. "For you." She stared at it like he'd handed her a contract with NASA. "You're firing me, no. It's just a gift." Grace opened it slowly. The black card gleamed against her calloused hands. Her eyes widened. "This is a mistake. Yesterday I burned banana bread. You sure you're okay? Use it however you like. 3 days. No limit." Grace laughed nervously, shaking her head. "Seriously, I could buy anything." "Even anything," Oliver confirmed, already walking away. Behind him, James caught Grace's uncertain expression. She wasn't dazzled. She looked burdened, and that more than anything set her apart. Oliver poured himself a glass of whiskey, eyes fixed on the city. "Let's see what the world reveals, James." And somewhere deep down, though he would never admit it aloud, Oliver knew this was about more than wealth. It was about truth, about stripping away the polished layers of privilege. And he had no idea that in choosing Grace, he had just lit the first spark in a fire that would challenge not only loyalty and love, but the very lines of race and class that divided his world. The first charges appeared before noon. James stood by the window with his tablet scanning the reports as if they were battlefield dispatches. "Anything unusual?" Oliver asked, sipping his coffee. James cleared his throat. "Not unless you consider 3 helicopters, a couture gown, and 5-star hotel bookings unusual." Oliver smirked. "Predictable." Daisy. She rented a helicopter to make an entrance at the Skyline Club. Social media's already flooded with photos. Oliver shook his head. Susanna. A shopping spree at Bergdorf Goodman, $5,000 on shoes alone. She captioned one picture, "Investing in professional image," and Valeria James scrolled. She hired an event planner. A gala next weekend, invitations already sent to half the Seattle elite. Oliver let out a short, humorless laugh, like a Sunday romance movie. Beautiful, empty, expected. James hesitated before speaking again. "And Grace?" Oliver raised an eyebrow. "Yes. What about Grace?" James tapped the screen. "Rice diapers, second-hand toys, poster paint, and 200 hot dogs." Oliver almost choked on his coffee. "Hot dogs." 200, yes, along with balloons, sugar art supplies, brushes, and a rented van. James glanced up. The receipt lists the destination, St. Francis Home Shelter. Oliver leaned back, lips curling in a slow, fascinated smile. Charity James nodded. "Looks like it." The billionaire fell silent, staring at the tablet. Grace's purchases looked out of place among the glittering excess of the other 3. There were no Instagram captions, no luxury brands, no signs of ambition dressed as generosity, just groceries, toys, balloons, and a rented van. James broke the silence. "Sir, you know what this means, don't you, Daisy? Susanna and Valeria, everything they bought reinforces the system that already serves them. Grace is the only one directing the wealth somewhere it never goes." Oliver tapped his finger against the glass of his cup, deep in thought. "That's exactly why I chose her." Later that afternoon, Oliver's SUV pulled up across from a modest neighborhood he had rarely visited. From behind the tinted windows, he saw the rented van parked outside a squat brick building, St. Francis Home, Shelter and Support. Children's laughter spilled into the street. He stepped out, suit immaculate, against the backdrop of cracked sidewalks and peeling paint. The air smelled of hot dogs and cotton candy. Through the gate, Oliver caught sight of Grace. She wore an oversized t-shirt, jeans, smeared with paint hair tied back in a loose bun. Her face was flushed with the joy of someone who belonged. She was inflating balloons while a group of children tugged at her sleeves. One girl, no more than 7, her braids undone, looked up at Grace with wide eyes. "Miss Grace, do we get to keep the toys?" Grace crouched down, smiling. "Every single one. And the balloons, too. But you gotta promise me something. What, that you'll make a mess so big cleaning up feels like a workout." The children erupted in laughter. Oliver stood frozen, a curious ache forming in his chest. This was no calculated philanthropy designed for cameras. No staged spectacle for wealthy donors. This was a black woman often invisible in the halls of his penthouse, transforming borrowed wealth into something lasting. As the van doors swung open, boxes of hot dogs, crayons, and toys spilled into the courtyard. Grace's voice rose above the noise. "All right, superheroes, who's hungry?" Oliver remained by the gate, hidden watching. He realized with a start that he wasn't just conducting an experiment. He was crossing into a world his money had never touched, and one his privilege had always allowed him to ignore. James' words echoed in his head. They'll reveal themselves. And Grace had. Not with a designer dress or a rented helicopter, but with balloons, hot dogs, and the quiet rebellion of proving that real wealth wasn't measured in glittering receipts, but in children's laughter no headline would ever print. The gates of St. Francis swung inward with a reluctant groan. Oliver hesitated, one polished shoe on the sidewalk, the other on the cracked pavement of the courtyard. His world-glass towers and boardrooms had never brushed against this one. Inside, chaos reigned. Balloons bobbed in the air, children darted between folding tables, and the smell of grilled hot dogs mingled with cheap poster paint. Against this vibrant backdrop stood Grace, dressed in a clown costume far too large for her, a rubber nose perched on her face. She twisted a balloon with exaggerated seriousness. "And if you turn it this way, oops!" The balloon burst with a sharp pop. Grace threw up her hands in mock horror as the kids roared with laughter. Oliver leaned against a tree, watching. She was radiant in her own way, not because of glittering gowns or jewelry, but because the children lit up when she smiled. An older woman in a faded cardigan approached him. "You must be Mr. Grant, Margaret, director of St. Francis. Didn't expect to see a man like you here." Oliver straightened. "I heard about the event. Thought I might help." Margaret's eyes twinkled. "Help? Well, Grace has it handled, but you're welcome to try." Before he could reply, Grace spotted him. She froze, mid-performance clown nose askew. "Mr. Grant, what are you doing here?" Oliver shrugged lightly. "Following my curiosity." Her eyes narrowed. "You spying on me? Scientific observation?" he said, smirking. "Uh-huh," Grace muttered, clearly unconvinced. "Well, since you're here, grab a spatula. 200 hot dogs won't cook themselves." Minutes later, the billionaire of skyscrapers stood at a battered grill struggling with sausages while ketchup splattered his white dress shirt. Grace leaned over, chuckling. "Ever considered a career in demolition because you're destroying dinner?" The children didn't care. They crowded around Oliver, tugging at his sleeve, peppering him with questions. "Are you really rich?" one boy asked. "A little," Oliver admitted. "Can you buy a dragon?" "There are no real dragons," Oliver said. "Yes, there are," the boy countered stubbornly. Grace said she saw one. Oliver glanced at Grace, who winked without missing a beat on the grill. "Grace tells the best stories," another child added proudly. Later, when the sun dipped low, he found Grace kneeling beside a girl who had scraped her knee. Grace removed her clown nose, speaking softly. "Hey, princess, that looks painful. But lucky for you, I have magic bandages." She pressed a bright cartoon plaster on the wound. "Now you've got super healing powers." The girl sniffled, then smiled. "Really?" "Only if you jump 3 times," Grace whispered. The girl hopped awkwardly, giggling through tears, and the courtyard erupted in cheers. Oliver's throat tightened. In boardrooms, he measured success in millions. Here, Grace measured it in smiles. When the last balloon deflated and the children drifted to sleep, Oliver lingered by the tables, helping pack up. "Why do you do this?" he asked quietly. Grace paused, sweeping confetti into a dustpan. "Because someone has to. These kids deserve to feel like the world hasn't forgotten them, even if it's just for an afternoon." "But you get nothing out of it," Oliver pressed. Grace looked up, eyes steady. "I get the best part of my day. Isn't that enough?" For the first time in years, Oliver had no clever reply. He returned to his SUV that night with paint on his cuffs, the faint smell of hot dogs clinging to his suit, and a thought he couldn't shake. Grace Williams, his black housekeeper, whom society barely noticed, had just taught him more about humanity than any deal dinner or donation ever had. The penthouse dining room glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished silver. But beneath the shine, tension already simmered. Oliver had summoned Daisy, Susanna, Valeria, and Grace to dinner, presenting it as a gesture of gratitude. Only James knew the truth. This was the moment of reckoning. Daisy arrived first, sweeping in like a storm of perfume and silk. She positioned herself near the window where the light framed her face, just so, dress shimmering like a social media filter come alive. Susanna followed, tablet tucked under her arm, posture rigid. She looked as if she'd walked into a boardroom instead of a dinner. Valeria appeared, fashionably late, sunglasses still on despite the dimmed lights. She slid into her chair with feline grace, as though the whole world existed to amuse her. And then Grace. She emerged from the kitchen apron, still tied, hair escaping its bun hands, damp from washing dishes. "Sorry I'm late," she said sheepishly. The oven looked like a battlefield. The contrast was brutal. 3 women draped in wealth. 1 woman marked by work. Oliver cleared his throat. 3 days ago, I gave each of you a black credit card. Tonight, I'd like to hear how you chose to use it. Daisy leaned forward, smile bright but sharp. "Oh, Ollie, it was transformative. I rented a helicopter to make an unforgettable entrance at Skyline Club. I shared the experience with my followers. It inspired thousands. Thousands of likes," Grace muttered under her breath. Susanna spoke next, voice clipped and professional. "I invested in my professional wardrobe. Strategic image building translates into long-term opportunities. In business, appearances are leverage. Valeria lifted her glass. I planned a gala. Influence demands spectacle. Bringing the right people together creates ripples of power. Oliver nodded, then turned. Grace. She shifted uneasily. Nothing fancy. Bought food, diapers, toys for the kids at St. Francis. Supplies for games. Stuff like that. Silence. Then Daisy's laugh, delicate, but edged with cruelty. Honey, normal would be a spa day, not hot dogs and crayons. Susanna adjusted her glasses. Or a leadership course. Something to build skills. Not balloons. Grace looked at them, genuinely puzzled. Why would I need a spa day? My skin's fine, and what class teaches you how to make kids smile? Because that's what mattered. Valeria chuckled low and dismissive. That's sweet, but real impact requires elegance. A gala, for example. Not clown costumes. Grace's eyes narrowed. Funny, those kids didn't seem to care about elegance. They just cared about feeling seen. The air tightened, the divide laid bare. Daisy leaned forward, voice syrupy. Grace, darling, don't you think maybe you helped the orphanage to impress Oliver? Grace blinked, startled. Impress him with hot dogs. Kindness can be strategic, Susanna added, especially for someone in your position. The implication landed heavy, a black maid angling above her place. Grace sat back slowly, eyes moving from one woman to the next. Her voice, when it came, was steady. Let me get this straight. You think helping hungry kids was a trick to impress my boss? Meanwhile, you... She pointed lightly at Daisy, rented a helicopter for Instagram likes. You, she nodded at Susanna, bought shoes that cost more than 6 months of my pay. And you, her gaze cut to Valeria, threw money at a party no kid will ever see, and you're telling me I'm the one with the hidden agenda. The silence cracked. Oliver had to look down at his plate to hide his smirk. Grace folded her arms, her voice rising just enough. I don't need a strategy. I've been helping St. Francis long before I worked here, long before Mr. Grant even knew my name. If that makes me less refined, so be it. But don't twist my love for those kids into some scheme to climb your ladder. For the first time that night, the 3 women had no rehearsed reply. Their confidence faltered, masks slipping. And Oliver, watching Grace hold her ground, realized this dinner wasn't just about money or choices. It was about a deeper truth. In a room full of privilege, the one person society valued least was the only one who had nothing to hide. The cafe was small, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop on the city's south side. Its chipped tables and flickering neon sign would never appear on the pages of glossy magazines. That was exactly why Grace chose it. Oliver sat opposite her, an espresso untouched before him, his tailored suit out of place against the peeling wallpaper. Grace stirred sugar into her coffee, clearly stalling. You don't like rich people coffee, do you? Oliver asked with a tentative smile. Grace snorted. Rich people coffee tastes the same as the instant kind. Only difference is one comes with a side of pretension. She finally looked up, eyes sharp. Why are you really here, Mr. Grant? Curiosity, guilt, entertainment. Oliver leaned forward. Because what I saw at St. Francis, it stayed with me. I need to understand why you do it. For a moment she said nothing, just traced circles on the rim of her mug. Then she exhaled. I grew up there. Oliver blinked. At St. Francis? From day 1 to 18, Grace replied matter-of-factly. My mother was young, broke, and black in a city that didn't give her a chance. She left me with a note that said she loved me but wanted me to have a better life. Grace's voice wavered, though her face remained calm. Funny thing about orphanages, better life is relative. Oliver's throat tightened. You never got adopted. Grace gave a short laugh. Not once. You know why. Because the couples who walked through those doors were looking for children who looked like them. Blonde curls, pale skin, not girls with braids and brown skin. I watched kids get chosen while I stood in the corner smiling like it didn't break me. After a while, you stop hoping. You just learn to be the one who stays behind. Her words fell heavy between them. Outside, a bus rattled past, drowning out the silence. I'm sorry, Oliver said softly. Grace waved it off. Don't be. I had Margaret, the director. She's an angel. And I had the other kids. We became a family. I learned to cook by helping in the kitchen when I was 8, burned more meals than I saved, but at least no one starved. She smirked. That's how I discovered my natural gift for ruining risotto. Oliver chuckled, though his chest ached. But it must have been lonely. Grace's smile dimmed. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the hand-me-down clothes. It was the feeling that I was invisible, like the world didn't have a place for me. And when I finally aged out at 18, the message was loud and clear. You're on your own. She leaned back, crossing her arms. So I cleaned houses, worked double shifts in diners, whatever it took. I got used to being overlooked. And you know what? It made me stronger. Invisible people notice everything. We learn what's real and what's fake faster than anyone else. Oliver sat in silence, humbled. He'd grown up with private tutors, legacy admissions, and safety nets everywhere. Grace had grown up with none and still found a way to give. Grace, he said carefully, you've carried this your whole life. And yet when I handed you that card, you didn't think of yourself. You thought of those kids. Grace looked down at her mug. Because I see myself in them. A little girl with braids who doesn't get picked. A boy who learns early that his skin color makes people cross the street. If I can give them one afternoon where they feel joy one day, where they matter, then maybe they won't carry the same scars I do. Her voice cracked just slightly before she masked it with humor. Besides, someone's got to keep hot dog companies in business. Oliver smiled faintly, but inside something shifted. Grace's story wasn't just about survival. It was about a quiet resistance against a world that had tried to erase her. And for the first time in his life, Oliver wondered if his wealth, his towering empire of privilege, had blinded him to the truths Grace carried so easily. The Seattle Convention Center glowed like a palace that evening, chandeliers spilling gold light over marble floors. Chauffeurs lined the curb, their engines humming, while guests in designer gowns ascended the carpeted steps. Inside, champagne flutes clinked, laughter echoed, and every movement felt choreographed. Oliver adjusted his tie for the third time, though his nerves weren't for himself. His eyes drifted toward the makeshift dressing room where Grace was preparing. When she finally stepped out, the room seemed to pause. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated, and shoes borrowed from Margaret at the orphanage. Her hair was pulled back neatly, but her posture betrayed tension. "Mr. Grant," she whispered as she approached, "I don't belong here." Oliver shook his head. "Grace, you belong exactly here, more than half the people in this ballroom." Before she could argue, the lights dimmed. An announcer's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker this evening, Ms. Grace Williams." Applause rippled, polite but curious. Grace's steps echoed as she crossed the stage. She gripped the microphone like it might shatter. For a moment, her throat closed. "My name is Grace," she began, voice trembling. "And I grew up at St. Francis Home, the orphanage we're here to support tonight." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some guests leaned forward, intrigued. Others exchanged skeptical glances, the kind that whispered, "A maid on stage." Grace took a breath. "I know you're used to numbers chart strategies, but I'd rather talk about children. Real children. Tommy, who draws superheroes on every scrap of paper. Sarah, who sings when she thinks no one's listening. Michael, who collects pebbles because he swears each one has a face." The ballroom grew quiet. Her voice steadied. "These kids don't need pity. They need opportunity. They need someone to believe they can be more than the labels the world gives them." Then disaster. Grace gestured too broadly and bumped into a passing waiter. A tray of champagne tilted, spilling down the suit of Robert Whitfield, one of Seattle's most powerful businessmen. Gasps swept the room. Grace froze, mortified. "Oh my God, sir, I'm so sorry I didn't." Whitfield stared at her dripping champagne face, unreadable. The silence stretched until Oliver, heart-pounding, strode on stage. "Robert," he said smoothly, grabbing a napkin, "looks like Grace decided you needed a drink earlier than expected." For a beat, no one breathed. Then Whitfield chuckled. "Well, in 30 years of galas, I've never been part of the entertainment. Consider me honored." The crowd laughed, tension broken. Grace's cheeks burned, but she forced a smile. "Next time I'll try not to drown the donors." Whitfield winked. "Next time, young lady, I'll sit further from the stage." The laughter softened the edges of the night. Grace continued this time with more honesty, even humor. She told stories of scraped knees and magic bandages of birthday cakes made from store-brand cupcakes of moments where joy bloomed in unlikely places. Her voice wavered when she admitted I never got adopted. I stayed until I aged out. But I swore those kids wouldn't feel as invisible as I once did. By the time she finished, silence lingered for a heartbeat. Then applause thundered. Not polite, not obligatory, real. Oliver exhaled pride swelling in his chest. She had faced the room, the prejudice, the mistake, and turned it into triumph. But as the night wore on, not every smile was warm. Daisy, in her crimson gown, whispered sharply to Susanna near the bar. Valeria sipped her wine with narrowed eyes. To them, Grace's presence wasn't inspiring. It was threatening. And though Grace stood beneath the chandeliers radiant in her own unpolished way, the storm brewing in the shadows promised this victory would not come without a price. The morning after the gala, Oliver's penthouse buzzed with congratulatory calls. Pledges of donations poured in. Journalists praised the event's authenticity. Yet beneath the surface, the first cracks appeared. By mid-afternoon, a headline hit the local news: Charity Funds Misused Housekeeper at Center of Scandal. Oliver read it twice, disbelief tightening his chest. The article claimed Grace had inflated supply costs for the gala, pocketing the difference. Sources suggested she used the event for self-promotion. James entered quietly, tablet in hand. "Sir, the phone hasn't stopped ringing. Channel 7 is demanding a statement. Other outlets, too." Oliver slammed the paper onto his desk. "This is absurd. I was there. I saw everything." James hesitated. "Still, it's spreading fast. Social media is full of it." Meanwhile, Grace sat on the kitchen stool reading the headline on her cracked phone screen. Her hands trembled. "Misused funds. Are they serious?" Oliver approached, anger blazing. "Grace, listen to me. I don't believe a word of this." Her eyes searched his face. "Don't you?" The question pierced deeper than any accusation. Oliver swallowed. "Of course I don't. But I need time to sort the facts to protect the foundation." Grace laughed bitterly, a sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Protect the foundation? My name just got dragged through the mud, Oliver. And you're worried about your brand." "I'm worried about you," he insisted. But even as the words left his mouth, he heard the hesitation that betrayed him. Grace stood, shoulders rigid. "Do you know what it's like to grow up black in this city? To be the first suspect before anyone asks a question? I lived 18 years in an orphanage watching couples pick white kids while I stayed behind. I don't get the benefit of doubt, Oliver. Not from strangers, and clearly not from you." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Grace, please. I'll fix this." Her voice broke. "You shouldn't need proof to believe me." The room went silent, heavy with everything unspoken. That night, Grace packed a small bag. She paused at the kitchen door, looking once at the penthouse she had scrubbed, cooked in, filled with her off-key humming. Oliver appeared in the hall, tie-loosened eyes desperate. "Don't go." Grace met his gaze, steady now. "I survived being abandoned once. I won't stay where I'm doubted again." She walked out, the click of the door echoing like a verdict. Oliver stood frozen in the empty apartment. The chandeliers glowed, the city glittered outside, but the silence was unbearable. For the first time he realized what true loss felt like. Not money, not status, trust. And in the distance, Daisy scrolled her phone with a satisfied smile. The storm she and Susanna had conjured was spreading exactly as planned. Rain streaked down the penthouse windows, blurring the city skyline into a smear of gray. Oliver stood with his back to it, staring at the empty chair Grace had occupied only hours ago. The kitchen was silent. No clattering pans, no humming. Just silence, sharp and unforgiving. James entered, voice low. "Sir, reporters are camped outside the building. They're demanding a comment about Grace." Oliver rubbed his temples. Tell them we're preparing an official response." With respect, James said carefully, "That sounds like hesitation. People will read it as doubt." Oliver snapped harsher than he meant. "What am I supposed to say? That the woman He stopped himself, breath ragged. "That Grace is innocent. Without evidence, it's just my word against the press." James looked at him with rare disappointment. "Sometimes, sir, your word is enough. At least it should be." Meanwhile, across the city, Grace trudged through puddles with her small backpack. She had returned to the neighborhood she once called home. Faded apartment blocks, the smell of fried food and exhaust lingering in the air. Margaret, the orphanage director, opened her door wide when she saw her. "Grace, sweetheart. I read the lies. Don't you worry. The children asked if you'd visit." Grace forced a smile, but her eyes burned. "I needed to be somewhere I'm not questioned." At the penthouse, Oliver sat alone at the dining table, untouched dinner before him. He replayed the moment again and again, the way Grace's voice cracked when she asked if he believed her. The truth for a heartbeat, he hadn't known what to say. A single hesitation, and she had seen it. He poured himself a drink, but it didn't dull the ache. Wealth had shielded him all his life, but no amount of money could buy back the trust of a woman who had lived her entire life without it. The next morning, tabloids splashed her face across their covers. MAID turned con artist, charity angel, or manipulator photos from the gala circulated with captions dripping in suspicion. Daisy and Susanna were quoted as unnamed sources feeding the narrative while polishing their own reputations. Valeria, ever strategic, stayed silent. Her smirk and paparazzi photos said enough. Oliver stared at the headlines until his vision blurred. James approached quietly. "Sir, you could end this now. Stand in front of a camera and defend her." Oliver's voice was raw, and if I'm wrong, James's reply was sharp. "Then at least she'll know you stood with her instead of against her." But Oliver stayed seated, paralyzed by a lifetime of boardroom caution. For the first time, his instincts, the ones that built empires, had failed him where it mattered most. And Grace, watching the news from Margaret's worn couch, whispered to herself. He hesitated. It wasn't anger in her voice. It was something heavier. The kind of disappointment that comes when the person you trusted most proves the world's prejudice right. 2 sleepless nights had carved hollows beneath Oliver's eyes. His penthouse office, usually a place of order and sleek efficiency, now looked like the hideout of a desperate man. Newspapers were spread across the desk, social media posts printed and circled in red ink. James set down a tray of untouched food. "Sir, you can't keep running on caffeine and anger." Oliver didn't look up. "I can't lose her, James. Not like this. Somebody set her up. Daisy, Susanna. Maybe both. I just need proof." James folded his arms. "Proof, or the courage you should have shown when she asked if you believed her." The words stung. Oliver winced but didn't argue. Instead, he grabbed his jacket. "Come on, we're going undercover." 2 hours later, the billionaire and his assistant looked anything but. Oliver wore sunglasses too large for his face, a newsboy cap pulled low, and an ill-fitting trench coat borrowed from wardrobe storage. James, far more dignified, sported a deliveryman's cap and clipboard. "You look ridiculous," James muttered. "Perfect," Oliver replied. "No one will suspect a thing." Their first stop was Daisy's favorite cafe. Oliver slid into a booth pretending to read the menu upside down. Daisy swept in moments later, radiant in designer heels phone already pressed to her ear. "Yes," she said, her voice sharp. The article landed exactly as planned. "Grace is finished." She paused to stir her latte. Susanna handled the documents flawlessly. Oliver won't risk defending a black maid against public opinion. He'll do what men like him always do, distance himself. Oliver's jaw tightened, fists clenching beneath the table. He wanted to confront her then and there, but James's warning glance kept him in place. Without recording, all he had was fury. Meanwhile, James made his way to Susanna's office disguised as a flower courier. "Delivery for Susanna Williams," he announced. She waved him inside, barely glancing up from her call. "Yes, Mother. I know it sounds cruel, but it's strategy. Oliver needs someone polished beside him, not her." Susanna's lip curled. "Grace doesn't fit. And the scandal proves it. People like her never last in our world." James lowered the bouquet carefully, pressing the record button hidden in his sleeve. Every word dripped with entitlement, with prejudice disguised as professionalism. By the time he stepped back into the hallway, he had what Oliver needed: undeniable proof. At dusk, they reconvened in the penthouse. Oliver paced, running a hand through his disheveled hair, while James played the recording. Susanna's voice filled the room. People like her never last in our world. The words echoed like a verdict. Oliver stopped pacing. His eyes burned with both rage and shame. "She was right," he whispered. "Grace was right. The world doubts her first. And I let myself become part of that world." James closed the tablet. "So the question is, what are you going to do now?" Oliver turned to the window, watching the city lights blink awake. "I'm going to clear her name, then I'm going to fight like hell to win back the trust I threw away." For the first time in days, resolve replaced doubt. The battle wasn't just against Daisy and Susanna, it was against the system that had made their scheme believable. And Oliver knew he couldn't undo the hesitation that broke Grace's heart. But he could decide what kind of man he would be next. The courtyard of St. Francis buzzed with unusual energy. Journalists with cameras milled about, local officials whispered in small groups, and the children watched wide-eyed from the playground, as though sensing something important was about to happen. Margaret, the director, guided Oliver toward the makeshift stage. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Grant? You'll be airing some very dirty laundry in front of a lot of people." Oliver tightened his grip on the folder in his hands, the folder filled with James's recordings, social media screenshots, and every damning piece of evidence. Yes, this is where it needs to happen, right here where Grace gave everything without asking for anything. Margaret's gaze softened. "She's here, you know." Oliver's chest clenched. Grace Margaret nodded toward the back of the crowd. There she was, jeans, a simple t-shirt, hair pulled into a ponytail. She hadn't dressed for an audience, but her presence stole his breath all the same. She stood stiffly, arms crossed as if bracing herself for another wound. When the microphone screeched to life, the courtyard fell silent. Oliver stepped forward, heart pounding harder than at any boardroom negotiation. "Thank you all for coming. I owe you the truth. Not the polished truth of press releases, but the real truth." He held up the folder. Recently, accusations were made against Grace Williams, accusations that she misused charity funds. "I'm here to say those accusations are lies." A ripple went through the crowd. Cameras clicked. Grace's eyes widened, but she didn't move. "These lies," Oliver continued, "were fabricated by two people I once trusted. Daisy Patterson and Susanna Williams conspired to plant false evidence and spread false stories to the media. We have recordings, documents, proof of their scheme." He paused, voice tightening. "And proof of something darker, the prejudice that made their lies so easy to believe." The words hung heavy. Some reporters shifted uncomfortably. Others scribbled faster. Oliver scanned the crowd until his eyes found Grace. "I need to confess something, too. When those accusations first appeared, I hesitated. For one terrible moment, I let doubt creep in. And in that moment, I failed Grace." His voice broke raw and unguarded. "Because if I truly knew her, I would have known immediately that she was incapable of such betrayal. And the fact that I hesitated says more about my blindness than about her." Children fidgeted near the stage, not fully understanding the weight of his words. One small voice piped up from the front, Michael clutching his pebble collection. "Grace didn't do anything bad. She makes us laugh." Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing the tension for a heartbeat. Oliver smiled faintly. "Exactly, Michael. Grace has done nothing but give. She gives her time, her love, her strength, even when the world turns its back." He turned fully toward Grace now, his voice steady. "Grace Williams, you are the most genuine, selfless person I've ever met, and I failed to stand by you when you needed me most. For that, I am sorry." His throat tightened. "And I'm asking not for forgiveness, but for a chance to prove I can be the man who trusts you without hesitation." The crowd buzzed. Some clapped softly. Reporters craned forward for her reaction. Grace's eyes shimmered, but her jaw was firm. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she stood at the foot of the stage. The children, sensing the gravity of the moment, tugged her hands, urging her upward. She climbed the steps slowly, facing Oliver, under the weight of hundreds of eyes. For a long moment she just looked at him, at the man who had doubted her, but who now stood exposed, vulnerable, begging in front of strangers. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "You broke something when you hesitated, Oliver. You can't fix it with speeches." Oliver swallowed hard. "Then let me fix it with my actions, starting now." Grace studied him. The crowd leaned in. Then at last she gave the faintest nod. Actions. We'll see. The courtyard erupted in applause. Some reporters shouted questions, but all Oliver saw was Grace standing beside him, not yet forgiving, but not walking away. And in that fragile space between anger and hope, he felt the first breath of redemption. The days after the press conference were a whirlwind. Headlines shifted almost overnight. Grace Williams cleared of wrongdoing. Billionaire exposes conspiracy by inner circle. From MAID to advocate, a new voice emerges. For the first time, Grace's name was no longer tied to scandal, it was tied to resilience. Yet she remained cautious, moving through each day with a quiet wariness, as though waiting for the world to turn against her again. Oliver noticed it in the way she held her shoulders, in the way her laughter never rose as freely as it once had. One evening he found her in the penthouse kitchen, hands buried in soapy water, staring at nothing. "You're still not convinced," he said, gently. Grace didn't look at him. "Public opinion changes fast, Oliver. Today I'm the underdog everyone admires. Tomorrow I'm a headline again. That's how it works when you're black and don't fit the story people expect." Her words cut deep. Oliver stepped closer. "Then let's change the story. Together." She glanced at him skeptical. "How, not with another gala, not with more champagne and chandeliers?" He opened a folder on the counter, spreading out papers. "With something lasting, a foundation, not charity to make rich people feel good, a program that gives these kids real power education mentorship internships, pathways to futures no one can take from them." Grace dried her hands slowly. "And you want me to lead it?" "Who else could?" Oliver asked. "You know their struggles. You lived them." Grace gave a bitter laugh. "That's exactly why people won't listen. I'm a maid, Oliver, a black maid who grew up in an orphanage. You think CEOs are going to take me seriously?" Oliver leaned forward, eyes steady. "Then we'll make them. Not because of me, but because of you. Your voice is stronger than mine, Grace, stronger than theirs. It's time they hear it." She hesitated, torn between fear and the spark of something larger than herself. "And what if I fail? Then we fail together," Oliver said simply. The first planning meetings were awkward. Oliver's board members eyed Grace like an intruder. She wore her best clothes, still modest compared to their tailored suits, and spoke with a nervous edge. But when she began describing her vision tutoring programs, community workshops, safe spaces for children, her words carried a fire that silenced the room. One executive muttered afterward, "She's rough around the edges." Oliver replied loud enough for all to hear, "Edges cut through stone." "And that's exactly what we need." Weeks passed. Grace grew into her role, though doubt shadowed her at every turn. When a donor questioned her credentials, she reminded him calmly, "Survival is a credential, and so is turning pain into hope." The donor left speechless and wrote a check the next day. For Oliver, the transformation was staggering. Grace wasn't just surviving anymore, she was shaping futures. Yet he knew her battle was far from over. The whispers of class and race didn't vanish overnight. They lingered in subtle comments and skeptical glances. But each time Grace stood taller. And Oliver realized this wasn't just about redemption anymore. It was about building something that could outlive both of them, a future where children like Grace once was would never again feel invisible. And for the first time in years, Oliver felt he wasn't pouring money into empty prestige. He was investing in something real. Someone real. Grace's rise was impossible to ignore. Newspapers that once called her a fraud now praised her as the heart of a new movement. Television hosts invited her onto morning shows. Kids from the orphanage proudly waved at the screen whenever she appeared, pointing and saying, "That's our Grace." But not everyone was applauding. Inside a high-rise hotel lounge, Daisy sipped champagne with Susanna, both women dressed as if scandal never touched them. The skyline glittered behind them, but their conversation was sharper than the glass that framed the view. "She's everywhere," Daisy muttered, scrolling through her phone. "They're calling her a hero." Her. Susanna's lips tightened. "Oliver's letting her take center stage. It's humiliating. A maid turned savior. It undermines everything we built around exclusivity and power." Daisy set down her glass eyes cold. Then we remind people where she came from. We don't need lies this time, just framing. Susanna leaned in. Go on, think about it. Every headline calls her the MAID who became an advocate. We spin it differently. She's only relevant because of Oliver. Without him, she's just another invisible face. We push the idea that he's using her as a prop, that she's the diversity token in his empire. Susanna's smirk returned. Weaponize the truth until it becomes poison. Clever. Within days, whispers began circulating. Opinion columns questioned if Oliver's foundation was a convenient rebranding exercise. Social media posts trended with hashtags like #TokenGrace and #PenthouseProp. Grace read them late at night alone in her apartment. Her chest ached as the comments scrolled past. Of course the MAID got elevated. She's his pet project. Classic billionaire PR stunt. Nothing authentic about it. She's just a placeholder until he finds someone polished. At the next foundation meeting, she kept her voice steady, but Oliver noticed the shadow in her eyes. Grace, he said afterward, catching her in the hallway. Don't read the comments. She gave a humorless laugh. Easy for you to say. You've never been reduced to a hashtag. People will always talk. They don't just talk, Oliver. They erase. They're saying I don't exist without you, that I can't matter unless I'm standing in your shadow. Oliver reached for her hand. You matter more than they'll ever admit, and not because of me. Grace pulled away not harshly, but with the weight of someone used to standing alone. Then prove it. Not with speeches, not with donations. Prove that my voice stands on its own. Oliver swallowed hard. He knew Daisy and Susanna hadn't been defeated, only waiting for their moment. And now they'd found a way to twist admiration into suspicion, turning Grace's authenticity into another battlefield. As Grace walked away, shoulders stiff, Oliver realized the storm had returned. Only this time, it wasn't just lies. It was the subtler, crueler enemy Grace had fought her whole life, the belief that a black woman's worth must always be borrowed. And this time, he would have to fight beside her or risk losing her all over again. The studio lights were blinding. Grace sat on a high-backed chair in front of a semicircle of cameras, a microphone clipped awkwardly to her dress. The morning show host, a polished woman with a perfect smile, leaned forward, questions loaded and ready. Grace Williams, the host, began, You've become the face of Oliver Grant's foundation. Some say you're a symbol of hope. Others call you a symbol of convenience, that without Mr. Grant you'd still be invisible. How do you respond to that? The audience stirred. Grace's heart hammered. She could almost hear Daisy and Susanna laughing in some corner of the city, waiting for her to stumble. For a long moment, she said nothing. She thought of her childhood in the orphanage, the couples who looked past her the night she cried into a thin pillow, the morning she woke up determined not to disappear. Finally, she spoke. They're right about one thing. I was invisible. Not because I lacked worth, but because people chose not to see me. And yes, Oliver gave me a platform, but what I do with it, that's mine. The host raised an eyebrow. So you don't believe you're just a diversity figure? Grace's jaw tightened. A figure doesn't cook hot dogs for 200 kids. A figure doesn't stay after everyone leaves to clean spilled paint and pick up broken balloons. I was doing this long before cameras showed up, and I'll be doing it long after the headlines fade. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the studio audience. The host pressed harder. But surely critics argue your influence depends on your connection to Mr. Grant. Grace leaned forward, eyes steady. Influence doesn't come from standing next to a billionaire. It comes from telling the truth of your life and refusing to let anyone erase it. My truth is that I grew up black in a city that didn't want me. I was left behind, overlooked, doubted. And yet here I am, still standing, still giving. That's not Oliver's story. That's mine. The studio fell silent. Even the host seemed taken aback. Then softly she asked, "Do you think you can change how people see you?" Grace smiled faintly, though her voice carried steel. "I don't need to change how they see me. I need to change how kids like me see themselves. That's the work. That's the fight." When the segment ended, the applause was genuine. Reporters tweeted quotes from her answers. Hashtags shifted from #TokenGrace to #GraceSpeaksTruth. Backstage, Oliver was waiting. His eyes shone with pride. "You were incredible." Grace shook her head, still trembling. I was terrified. He touched her arm lightly. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing up anyway. And you just did that for every child who ever felt invisible. Grace exhaled, shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. She didn't know if the attacks would stop. She didn't know if the world would ever stop questioning her worth. But she knew one thing with certainty: they would never silence her again. The ballroom of the Grant Foundation gleamed with polished marble and chandeliers, yet tonight it was no celebration. Oliver had called an emergency board meeting inviting donors, journalists, and staff. Daisy and Susanna arrived dressed as if for a victory parade, masks of confidence firmly in place. Grace stood quietly near the back, wearing a simple navy dress. She didn't need sequins or spectacle. Her presence alone carried weight now. Oliver stepped onto the stage, voice steady but sharp. Thank you all for coming. Tonight I want transparency. There have been questions about this foundation, about its leadership, about Grace Williams. Whispers rippled through the room. Daisy smirked, leaning toward Susanna. Here it comes, she whispered. Oliver continued, holding up a folder. We've investigated. And what we found was not mismanagement by Grace, but a deliberate attempt to destroy her. Gasps. Journalists leaned forward, pens scratching. He pressed a button on the projector. Susanna's recorded voice filled the ballroom. People like her never last in our world. The silence afterward was deafening. Susanna went pale. Daisy's eyes widened. Oliver's gaze swept the crowd. Those words were not just about Grace. They reveal the truth: prejudice, elitism, and fear. Daisy Patterson and Susanna Williams conspired to fabricate evidence, spread lies, and weaponize race and class to protect their own privilege. All eyes turned on the two women. Daisy lifted her chin defiantly. This is ridiculous, out of context, a smear against us. But Grace stepped forward, voice calm yet unshakable. Context. I grew up with context. In an orphanage where couples chose children who didn't look like me. In jobs where my work was invisible until I made a mistake. In a world where women like me are always questioned first. And tonight you tried to use that against me. Her words struck harder than any recording. Daisy faltered. Susanna stammered. We were strategizing. It wasn't enough. Oliver cut in. This foundation stands for empowerment, not prejudice. Effective immediately, Daisy and Susanna are removed from all positions and partnerships. The room erupted, some in applause, some in shock. Reporters shouted questions. Daisy's face twisted with fury. You'll regret this, Oliver. You're throwing away powerful allies for a MAID. Grace didn't flinch. She looked Daisy in the eye and said softly, I'm not a MAID. I'm a woman who knows her worth. That's something you'll never understand. The crowd roared its approval. Cameras flashed. And for the first time, the power Daisy and Susanna once wielded dissolved under the weight of truth. As security escorted them out, Oliver turned to Grace, his voice low but resolute. You ended them with honesty, not anger. That's strength I'll never stop admiring. Grace exhaled, relief and exhaustion washing over her. The battle wasn't just won, it was exposed, written into the very history of the foundation. And though she knew prejudice would never vanish overnight tonight, proved one thing: lies couldn't silence her anymore. Spring sunlight spilled across the gardens of St. Francis' home. Rows of folding chairs lined the lawn, draped in simple white cloths. Children darted between them, carrying wildflowers they'd picked themselves. The air smelled of fresh bred laughter and possibility. This wasn't one of Oliver's grand galas. There were no chandeliers, no velvet ropes, no photographers flashing endlessly. This was something else, something truer. At the center stood Grace in a modest cream dress that caught the light with every step. Margaret adjusted her veil with trembling hands, eyes shining. You look radiant, sweetheart, she whispered. Oliver waited beneath the arbor, dressed in a navy suit. His heart pounded not with the nerves of a boardroom battle, but with the raw human fear of losing what mattered most. When Grace walked toward him, every scar of doubt, every shadow of scandal melted away. Margaret officiated, her voice steady, despite the tears in her eyes. Oliver Grant, do you take Grace Williams as your partner, not as a savior, not as a symbol, but as an equal to build not only a home but a future. I do, Oliver said, voice thick with emotion. Grace Williams, do you take Oliver Grant not as a shield, not as a ladder, but as a man willing to learn to change and to walk beside you? Grace smiled through her tears. I do, but if he ever doubts me again, he's eating burnt risotto for life. The courtyard erupted in laughter. Children clapped. Margaret wiped her cheeks, and Oliver whispered, "Deal." They exchanged rings, simple, unadorned bands. No diamonds, no extravagance. Just metal shaped into circles, unbroken and unbreakable. When Oliver kissed her, it wasn't the kiss of a billionaire or a maid. It was the kiss of two souls who had fought their way through prejudice, betrayal, and fear, only to find each other standing tall at the end. Later, as dusk settled, Oliver sat on a bench with Grace watching the children run barefoot across the grass lanterns bobbing in their hands. "Remember when I thought wealth was power," he murmured. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "And now I know wealth is laughter. It's hot dogs at a shelter. It's a woman who turned a penthouse into a home. It's this." He gestured to the garden, alive with voices, joy echoing in the twilight. Grace's eyes softened. A different kind of wealth. Oliver kissed the top of her head, the only kind worth keeping. And under the rising stars, surrounded by children who would never again feel invisible, Oliver and Grace began the life they had fought so hard to claim rich, not in money, but in love, trust, and the endless promise of tomorrow.